All right, so welcome to Darwin Day 2021. A little bit delayed, but apologies for having to postpone, and thank you for coming back. On behalf of Hofstra University and also the Hofstra Humanist Society, I want to welcome everybody to Darwin Day, coming to you live via Zoom. My name is Dr. Brett Bennington, and I'm a professor of geology and the chair of the Department of Geology, Environment, and Sustainability at Hofstra. And joining me today to put on this presentation are my colleagues, Dr. Sylvia Silberger, who's from the Department of Mathematics, Dr. Scott Schroeder, who's Assistant Professor of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, and Sharon Stanley, who's the chairperson of Humanists of Long Island. And we've put together a little presentation about the Scopes trial, which I think you'll find interesting, and I hope you enjoy it. We're going to try and be a little bit theatrical with it, do some dramatic readings to kind of punctuate the lecture. Charles Robert Darwin, he was born on February 12th in 1809, and every year, honor around his birthday, events like this one are held to honor his life and work. And a question that I always like to start out with is, well, why Darwin? Why do we celebrate Darwin Day? Why don't we have a Newton Day or an Einstein Day? And I think the main reason why Darwin is sort of singled out for commemoration is because of what he represents, which is the power of science to transcend prejudice, myth, and magical thinking. And a certain responsibility to see the world as it really is and to accept what science shows us to be real, even if it makes us uncomfortable. And I don't think I need to tell anyone how important this message is right now, given that we find ourselves in the 21st century and well-established scientific truths, evolution, climate change, the effectiveness of vaccines. These ideas are under attack. Not because they're wrong or they're false, but because they are politically inconvenient or counterintuitive, and you know, people just choose not to accept them. And that's a shame, because science gives us some very powerful tools for meeting the challenges that face our society: pandemics, overpopulation, environmental degradation, antibiotic resistance, climate change, poverty, gun violence, just about, you know, any significant challenge you can think of. If you can collect data and study that challenge and approach it scientifically, you can come up with solutions. But increasingly, the process of science and the people who do science are denigrated because they provide answers that contradict cherished political, cultural, or religious beliefs. And so Darwin was somebody who devoted his life's work to pursuing a truth that he knew was going to disturb mankind's very sense of its place in the universe. And he knew it would probably cost him a few friends, but he kept on working at it because he couldn't deny the evidence. He knew what he was discovering was true, and wanted to bring it to the light. So this is why we gather once a year to celebrate the genius, vision, and courage of conviction that is Charles Darwin. Under normal circumstances, we would be meeting on the Hofstra campus, and we would finish off the event with a nice big birthday cake, and we'd sing happy birthday. Unfortunately, today we don't have cake for you. I'm sorry. But you're all invited back next year for the next Darwin Day, when hopefully we will be back on campus and we'll have a big birthday cake. Very good. So without further ado, what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to share my screen, and just give me a second to pull up the slides that we're using. All right, so tonight's let me go back. All right, so the title of our presentation tonight is Darwin on Trial, And we are focusing in on a very interesting event, the Scopes monkey trial, which happened in July in 1825 in Dayton, Tennessee. And what we're going to do is give you a little bit of background on the trial, and then talk about the people who played major roles in the trial and what it was all about. And then we're going to take turns reading some of the dialogue from the trial and some some text from the people involved to give you a good flavor of the different personalities and the issues here. So what motivated the Scopes trial was the Butler Act. And basically what happened was in 1925, a law was passed in Tennessee that prohibited the teaching of evolutionary theory in any public educational institution, everything from kindergarten up to universities. And what the Butler Act specifically said was that it shall be unlawful for any teacher in any of the universities, normals, or other public schools in the state to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. And the offense, a violation was a misdemeanor offense that carried a fine of between $100 and $500, which was real money back in 1925. And most people have heard of the Scopes trial because of a play, which then became a very famous movie, called Inherit the Wind. And Inherit the Wind was written in the early 1950s by two playwrights. It was first staged in 1955, and then in 1960, the movie version was released, which was a big hit. It had lots of star power. You had Spencer Tracy, Frederick March, Gene Kelly was in it, Harry Morgan, Claude Akins, Dick York, which some of you might remember, Dick York from Bewitched. So lots of big actors. And it's a wonderful play and it's a wonderful movie, but it's not very good history in that the playwrights were not trying to accurately show what happened in the Scopes trial. Instead, they were using the Scopes trial as a parable about the dangers of mob rule and the suppression of free speech during the McCarthy trials. Go ahead, Sharon.
We used the teaching of evolution as a parable, a metaphor for any kind of mind control. It's not about science versus religion. It's about the right to think.
So the play and the movie are compelling drama, but they're not very accurate history. So what we want to do today is kind of talk about what really happened. So who was Butler? Well, John Washington Butler, the Tennessee legislator who introduced the act prohibiting the teaching of evolution, was a farmer who represented rural counties that were steeped in the tradition of Protestant fundamentalism.
No,
Go ahead, Sylvia.
I didn't know anything about evolution when I introduced it. I'd read the papers that boys and girls were coming home from school and telling their fathers and mothers that the Bible was all nonsense. In the first place, the Bible is the foundation on which our American government is built. The evolutionist who denies the biblical story of creation, as well as other biblical accounts, cannot be a Christian. It goes hand in hand with modernism, makes Jesus Christ a fakir, robs the Christian of his hopes, and undermines the foundations of our government.
So Mr. Butler's fear of evolution had very deep roots. It was a part of a tradition of biblical literalism that extended back over 100 years in both British and American society. And fundamentalism, Protestant fundamentalism, arose in Europe in the 1800s as a reaction to theological liberalism in Protestant churches and universities. both in Europe and in America. Darwinian evolution contradicted their literalist reading of Genesis, and so it couldn't possibly be true. Another problem was that in the early 20th century in America, Darwinism was becoming associated with German militarism. So, we had just come through World War I, and this idea of, sort of might makes right, and, kind of an extension of survival of the fittest, was seen as one of the things that had motivated the German government. And then, so through the early decades of the 20th century, a movement gained momentum to push back against the teaching of evolution in American public schools. And the leader of this movement was a populist politician named William Jennings Bryan. So Bryan was, he was a Democrat, a populist Democrat, very well known as a speaker, and he ran for president several times unsuccessfully. Later in life, as his political career declined, he found a great fame as a speaker, going around the country and lecturing at churches and revivals and chautauquas. And his main interest was teaching against the theory of evolution, particularly as an explanation for the origin of human beings.
The only part of evolution in which any considerable interest is felt is evolution applied to man. A hypothesis in regard to rocks and plant life does not affect the philosophy upon which one's life is built. Evolution applied to fish, birds, and beasts would not materially affect man's view of his own responsibilities, except as an acceptance of unsupported hypothesis as to these would be used to support a similar hypothesis as to man. The evolution that is harmful, distinctly so, is the evolution that destroys man's family tree as taught by the Bible and makes him a descendant of lower life forms of life. This is a very vital matter.
So in Bryan's speeches, he called into question the truth of evolution, and he argued that it was dangerous to allow a mere scientific hypothesis to call into question what he believed were well-established religious truths.
The first objection to Darwinism is that it is only a guess and was never anything more. It is called a hypothesis. But the word hypothesis, though euphonious, dignified, and high-sounding, is merely a scientific synonym for the old-fashioned word guess. If Darwin had advanced his views as a guess, they would not have survived for a year, but they have floated for half a century, buoyed up by the inflated word hypothesis. When it is understood that hypothesis means guess, people will inspect it more carefully before accepting it. Why should the Bible, which the centuries have been unable to shake, be discarded for scientific works that have to be corrected and revised every few years?
Furthermore, Bryan argued that Darwinian ideas of natural selection and survival of the fittest were being used by social Darwinists to excuse poverty and block efforts to help the poor and the oppressed. He firmly believed that the people had a right to decide which ideas should be taught in the public schools that were being funded by their tax dollars.
The parents have a right to say that no teacher paid by their money shall rob their children of faith in God and send them back to their home skeptical or infidels or agnostics or atheists.
Okay, so that brings us to the trial. In the play, in Inherit the Wind, if you've seen it, it starts out very dramatically with police and local politicians kind of ambushing a teacher in his classroom and arresting him in the middle of a lesson for teaching evolution, and then they march him off to jail and lock him up until the trial. And this is not at all what happened. The Butler Act was a law that was viewed by many people in Tennessee as an embarrassment and essentially unenforceable. It was pointed out that the biology textbook that the state mandated included a chapter on evolution, which basically suggested that the state was requiring biology teachers to break the law. The way the Scopes trial came about was not, an arrest of a teacher, but instead a group of local businessmen got together in Dayton and decided that they could use a trial as a way to generate publicity and attract tourism and commerce to Dayton. So the trial was kind of cooked up in a drugstore in downtown Dayton. The American Civil Liberties Union was interested in becoming involved because they wanted to challenge the constitutionality of the Butler Act as a restraint on free speech and a violation of the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. So the ACLU was looking to test the law in court. Scopes, the teacher who was put on trial, essentially volunteered to take the fall. And I think he was actually approached by this group, and they said, would you mind, doing this? Would you mind being the subject of a trial? Go ahead, Sharon.
I furnished the body that was needed to sit in the defendant's chair,
as Mr. Scopes later said. So, and Scopes he wasn't even a biology teacher. He was a general science teacher. He didn't normally teach biology, but he had substituted in a few biology courses. There was some uncertainty as to whether he had actually taught evolution, but he agreed anyway to be arrested, and he was never put in jail. And he agreed to testify that he had taught evolution in violation of the law, even though he wasn't sure if he had or not. They had to coach his students to testify against him. They basically had to tell his students, here's what you need to say, about, to prove that I was teaching evolution. Sharon.
If you can prove that I've taught evolution and that I can qualify as a defendant, then I'd be willing to stand trial.
And between his arrest and the trial, he was brought to New York City so he could meet with the ACLU. The original intent of the ACLU, of course, was to lose the case because he did violate the law. But so they wanted to lose the case so they could appeal the verdict all the way up to the Tennessee Supreme Court, because they wanted to get the Tennessee Supreme Court to declare the law to be unconstitutional. But it didn't quite turn out that way. And one of the things that made the eventual trial so interesting was the involvement of Clarence Darrow. So to defend Scopes, the ACLU sent a team of lawyers to Dayton, which included Clarence Darrow, who was an incredibly famous trial lawyer and a very well-known agnostic and advocate for free speech rights. And Darrow's fame provided a counterweight for the defense's big name, which was William Jennings Bryan, who agreed to come to Dayton and be part of the prosecution team, even though Bryan had very little court experience. Now, Darrow's presence on the defense team was not really met with a great deal of excitement by the other defense lawyers. They kind of saw him as a distraction. And in fact, the ACLU only agreed to include him after Scopes met him in New York, and Scopes insisted that Darrow represent him. And Darrow ended up refocusing the defense of Scopes away from the question of constitutionality of the law, in part because the judge refused to allow this defense, and he refocused the trial into an attack on fundamentalist thinking. Go ahead, Sharon.
As soon as I heard William Jennings Bryan had joined the prosecution team, at once I wanted to go. This trial provided the opportunity to focus the attention of the country on the program of Mr. Bryan and the other fundamentalists in America.
So what the defense wanted to argue, using a bunch of expert witnesses, was that evolution was factual and also not incompatible with religion, which this was the view of reformist Protestant theologians. But the judge decided that he didn't want the jury to hear any of the expert witness testimony. What Darrow then shifted his argument towards was to argue that Bryan's fundamentalist reading of the Bible was based on willful ignorance of science, and that this had no place in a civil society.
Scopes isn't on trial. Civilization is on trial. I think this case will be remembered because it is the first case of this sort since we stopped trying people in America for witchcraft, because here we have done our best to turn back the tide that has sought to force itself upon this modern world of testing every fact in science by religious dictum.
Now, once the trial got started, it attracted press from all around the nation. So you had reporters from Chicago, from New York, and from Baltimore, from the West Coast. And these big newspapers from the big cities were not kind in their coverage of the trial, basically presenting the trial as a national embarrassment and depicting both Bryan and the locals as intellectually backwards in various editorials and cartoons. There's on the screen here a page from the New York Times talking about the trial. If you look at the subheadings, you have cranks and freaks flock to Dayton. Europe is amazed by the Scopes case. Farmers will try a teacher, et cetera. And then some of the editorial cartoons, an organ grinder labeled Dayton, and the organ is the Scopes case, and the caption is playing it for all it's worth. And then the other cartoon, which I very much like, a whole crowd of monkeys. And the one monkey is presenting the proposition that man is not related to the monkey, and saying all those in favor. And of course, the monkeys are very much in support of this because of the humans fighting in the background in a very embarrassing fashion. So, you know, the monkeys don't want anything to do with us. One reporter in particular, commentator, very famous essayist, was H.L. Mencken. Waiting for Zoom to catch up with the slide there. There we go. So H.L. Mencken was sent by the Baltimore Evening Sun to cover the trial, and he sent back these press dispatches, which were absolutely scathing. He ridiculed Bryan, but he also understood his power as a speaker. Scott, are you on?
Yes.
Take it away.
This old buzzard, having failed to raise the mob against its rulers, now prepares to raise it against its teachers. He can never be the peasant's president, but there is still a chance to be the peasant's pope. He leads a new crusade, his bald head glistening, his face streaming with sweat, his chest heaving beneath his rumpled alpaca coat. One somehow pities him despite his so palpable imbecilities. It is a tragedy indeed to begin life as a hero and to end it as a buffoon. But let no one, laughing at him, underestimate the magic that lies in his black, malignant eye, his frayed but still eloquent voice. He can shake and inflame these poor ignoramuses as no other man among us can shake and inflame them. And he is desperately eager to order the charge.
Mencken was also unsparing in his criticism of how the trial was conducted.
The Scopes trial, from the start, has been carried on in a manner exactly fitted to the anti-evolution law and the simian imbecility under it. There hasn't been the slightest pretense to decorum. The rustic judge, a candidate for re-election, has postured the yokels like a clown in a 10-cent sideshow, and almost every word he has uttered has been an undisguised appeal to their prejudices and superstitions. The chief prosecuting attorney, beginning like a competent lawyer and a man of self-respect, ended like a convert at a Billy Sunday revival. It fell to him, finally, to make a clear and astounding statement of theory of justice prevailing under fundamentalism. What he said, in brief, was that a man accused of infidelity had no rights whatever under Tennessee law.
Mencken also warned of the dangers of rural fundamentalism.
Darrow has lost this case. It was lost long before he came to Dayton, but it seems to me that he has nevertheless performed a great public service by fighting it to a finish and in a perfectly serious way. Let no one mistake it for comedy, farcical though it may be in all its details. It serves notice on the country that Neanderthal man is organizing in these forlorn backwaters of the land, led by a fanatic rid of sense and devoid of conscience.
You can read the collected writings of H.L. Mencken on the Scopes trial, available in a volume called A Religious Orgy in Tennessee. Makes for some pretty interesting reading. Okay, just waiting for Zoom to catch up. All right, very good. So the trial goes on for several days. Eventually, the judge moves the trial outdoors because it's so incredibly hot in July in Dayton, Tennessee. Much of what is said at the trial is not heard by the jury. The judge is very persnickety about the testimony that the jury is allowed to hear, because he's really not interested in trying the case in any way except to determine whether or not Scopes had violated the letter of the law. So the judge does not allow the jury to hear the testimony of the defense's expert witnesses, although he does allow some of the expert witnesses to read their testimony into the record of the trial in front of the crowds of spectators. Now, on the seventh day of the trial, frustrated by the judge's refusal to let him present his expert witnesses, Darrow decides to call William Jennings Bryan as a witness, as an expert witness on the Bible. And Darrow knows that even though the judge might not like this, Bryant's going to insist on testifying because of his ego. So Bryan agrees, and he's interrogated by Darrow, who proceeds to engage Bryan in a line of questioning, basically trying to undermine Bryant's literalist interpretation of the Bible. The Butler Act prohibited teaching any theory that contradicts the story of the creation of man in the Bible. So what Darrow's intent was to show that even Bryan knew that the interpreting biblical stories literally was scientifically absurd. And so the most fascinating part of the whole trial is this exchange between Bryan and Darrow, which we are going to perform for you now. The cross-examination of William Jennings Bryan by Clarence Darrow.
You have given considerable
coming
study.
up on the screen is.
Sorry.
I was just going to say the image on the screen is an actual photo that was taken during the cross-examination, and so you have Darrow standing on the right, and there's William Jennings Bryan seated and looking up at him on the left, and you can see they're outside the courthouse. So go ahead, take it away, players.
You have given considerable study to the Bible, haven't you, Mr. Bryan?
Yes, sir, I have tried to.
Then you have made a general study of it?
Yes, I have. I have studied the Bible for about 50 years or sometime more than that. But of course, I've studied it more as I've become older than when I was but a boy.
You claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted?
I believe everything in the Bible should be accepted as it is given there. Some of the Bible is given illustratively. For instance, "Ye art the salt of the earth." I would not insist that man is actually salt or that he had flesh of salt, but it is used in the sense of salt as saving God's people.
But when you read that Jonah swallowed the whale, or that the whale swallowed Jonah, excuse me, please, how do you literally interpret that?
When I read that a big fish swallowed Jonah, it does not say well. That is my recollection of it. A big fish, and I believe it. And I believe in a God who can make a whale and can make a man and make both what he pleases.
Now, you say the big fish swallowed Jonah, and he there remained how long? 3 days? And then he spewed him upon the land. You believe that the big fish was made to swallow Jonah?
I'm not prepared to say that. The Bible merely states that it was done.
You don't know whether it was an ordinary run of fish or made for that purpose?
You may guess. You evolutionists guess.
You are not prepared to say whether that fish was made especially to swallow a man or not?
The Bible doesn't say so, so I am not prepared to say.
But do you believe he made them? That he made such a fish and that it was big enough to swallow Jonah?
Yes, sir. Let me add, one miracle is just as easy to believe as another.
Just as hard?
It is hard to believe for you, but it's easy for me. A miracle is a thing performed beyond what man can perform. When you get within the realm of miracles, and it is just as easy to believe in the miracle of Jonah as any other miracle in the Bible.
Perfectly easy to believe that Jonah swallowed the whale?
If the Bible said so, the Bible doesn't make as extreme statements as evolutionists do.
The Bible says Joshua commanded the sun to stand still for the purpose of lengthening the day, doesn't it? And you believe it?
I do.
Do you believe at the time the entire sun went around the earth?
No, I believe the earth goes around the sun.
Do you believe that the men who wrote it thought that the day could be lengthened or that the sun could be stopped?
I don't know what they thought.
You don't know?
I think they wrote that fact without expressing their own thoughts.
Have you an opinion as to whether or not the men wrote that thought?
I want to object, Your Honor. It has gone beyond the pale of any issue that could possibly be injected into the lawsuit, except by imagination. I do not think the defendant has a right to conduct the examination any further, and I ask Your Honor to exclude it.
It seems to me it would be too exacting to confine the defense to the facts. If they are not allowed to get away from the facts, what have they to deal with?
Mr. Bryan is willing to be examined. Go ahead.
I read that years ago. Can you answer my question directly? If the day was lengthened by stopping either the earth or the sun, it must have been the earth.
Well, I should say so.
Now, Mr. Bryan, have you ever pondered what would have happened to the earth if it had stood still?
No.
You have not?
No, the God I believe in could have taken care of that, Mr. Darrow.
I see. Have you ever pondered what would naturally happen to the earth if it stood still suddenly?
No.
Don't you know that it would have been converted into molten mass of matter?
You testify to that when you get on the stand. I will give you a chance.
Don't you believe it?
I would want to hear expert testimony on that.
You have never investigated that subject?
I don't think I've ever had the question asked.
Or ever thought of it?
I have been too busy on things that I thought were of more importance than that.
You believe the story of the flood to be a literal interpretation?
Yes, sir.
When was that flood?
I would not attempt to fix the date. The date is fixed as suggested this morning.
About 4004 BC?
That has been the estimate of a man that is accepted today. I would not say it is accurate.
That estimate is printed in the Bible?
Everybody knows, at least I think most people know, that that was the estimate given.
But what do you think that the Bible itself says? Don't you know how it was arrived at?
I never made a calculation.
A calculation from what?
I couldn't say.
From the generations of man?
I would not want to say that.
What do you think?
I do not think about things I don't think about.
Do you think about things you do think about?
Well, sometimes.
Your Honor, he is perfectly able to take care of this, but we are attaining no evidence. This is not competent evidence.
These gentlemen have not had much chance. They did not come here to try this case. They came here to try to reveal religion. I'm here to defend it, and they can ask me any question they please.
Great applause from the bleachers.
From those whom you call yokels.
I have never called them yokels.
That is the ignorance of Tennessee, the bigotry.
You mean who are applauding you?
Those are the people whom you insult.
You insult every man of science and learning in the world because he doesn't believe in your fool religion.
I will not stand for that.
For what he is doing?
I am talking to both of you.
Wait until you get to me. Do you know anything about how many people there were in Egypt 3,500 years ago? Or how many people there were in China 5,000 years ago?
No.
Have you ever tried to find out?
No, sir. You are the first man I've ever heard who has been interested in it.
Mr. Bryan, am I the first man you have ever heard of who has been interested in the age of human societies and primitive man?
You are the first man I've ever heard speak of the number of people at those different periods.
Where have you lived all your life?
Not near you.
Nor near anybody of learning.
Oh, don't assume you know it all.
Do you know that there are thousands of books in our libraries on all those subjects that I have been asking you about?
I couldn't say, but I'll take your word for it.
Have you any idea how old the Earth is?
No,
The book you have introduced in evidence tells you, doesn't it?
I don't think it does, Mr. Darrow.
Let's see whether it does. Is this the one?
That's the one, I think.
It says BC 4004.
That's Bishop Ussher's calculation.
That is printed in the Bible you introduced.
Yes, sir.
Would you say that the Earth was only 4,000 years old?
Oh, no, I think it's much older than that.
How much?
I couldn't say.
Do you say whether the Bible itself says it is older than that?
I don't think it is older or not.
Do you think the Earth was made in 6 days?
Not 6 days of 24 hours.
Doesn't it say so?
No, sir.
Are you about through, Mr. Darrow?
I want to ask a few more questions about the creation.
I know. We are going to adjourn when Mr. Bryan comes off the stand for the day. Be very brief, Mr. Darrow. Of course, I believe I will make myself clear. Of course, it is incompetent testimony before the jury. The only reason I'm allowing this to go on at all is that they may have it in the appellate court as showing what the affidavit would be.
The reason I am answering is not for the benefit of the Superior Court. It is to keep these gentlemen from saying I was afraid to meet them and let them question me. And I want the Christian world to know that any atheist, agnostic, unbeliever can question me anytime as to my belief in God, and I will answer him.
I want to take exception to this conduct of this witness. He may be very popular down here in the hills.
Your Honor, they have not asked a question legally, and the only reason they have asked any question at all is for the purpose, as the question about Jonah was asked, for a chance to give this agnostic an opportunity to criticize a believer in the word of God. And I answered the question in order to shut his mouth so he cannot go out and tell his atheistic friends that I would not answer his question. That is the only reason, no more reason in the world.
Your Honor, on this subject, I would like to say that I would have asked Mr. Bryan, and I consider myself as good a Christian as he is, every question that Mr. Darrow has asked him for the purpose of bringing out whether or not there is to be taken in this court a literal interpretation of the Bible, or whether, obviously, as these questions indicate, if a general and literal construction cannot be put upon the parts of the Bible which have been covered by Mr. Darrow's questions. I hope for the last time, no further attempt will be made by counsel on either side of the case or Mr. Bryan to say the defense is concerned at all with Mr. Darrow's particular religious views or lack of religious views. We are here as lawyers with the same right to our views. I have the same right to mine as a Christian as Mr. Bryan has to his, and we do not intend to have this case charged by Mr. Darrow's agnosticism or Mr. Bryan's brand of Christianity.
Mr. Bryan, do you believe that the first woman was Eve?
Yes,
Do you believe she was literally made out of Adam's rib?
I do.
Did you ever discover where Cain got his life? His
No,
wife?
sir. No, sir. I leave the agnostics to hunt for her.
You have never found out?
I have never tried to find.
You have never tried to find?
No,
The Bible says he got one, doesn't it? Were there other people on the earth at that time?
I cannot say.
You cannot say. Did that ever enter your consideration?
Never bothered me.
There were no others recorded, but Cain got a wife.
That is what the Bible said.
Where she came from, you do not know. All right. Does the statement, the morning and the evening were the first day, and the morning and the evening were the second day, mean anything to you?
I do not think it necessarily means a 24-hour day.
You do not?
No,
What do you consider it to be?
I have not attempted to explain it. If you will take the second chapter, let me have the book. The 4th verse of the 2nd chapter says, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth. When they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. There, the word day there in the very next chapter is used to describe a period. I do not see that there is any necessity for construing the words, the evening and the morning, as meaning necessarily a 24-hour day. In the day when the Lord made the heaven and the earth.
Then, when the Bible says, for instance, and God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day, that does not necessarily mean 24 hours?
I do not necessarily think it does.
Do you think it does or does not?
I know a great many think so.
What do you think?
I do not think it does.
You think those days were not literal days?
I do not think they were 24-hour days.
What do you think about it?
That is my opinion. I do not know that my opinion is better on that subject than those who think it does.
You do not think that?
No, but I think it would be just as easy for the kind of God we believe in to make the earth in 6 days, as in 6 years, as in 6 million years, as in 600 million years. I do not think it important whether we believe one or the other.
Do you think those were literal days?
My impression is that they were periods, but I would not attempt to argue as against anybody who wanted to believe in literal days.
I will read it to you from the Bible. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Do you think that is why the serpent is compelled to crawl upon its belly?
I believe that.
Have you any idea how the snake went before that time?
No, sir.
Do you know whether he walked on his tail or not?
No, sir. I have no way to know.
Now, you refer to the cloud that was put in heaven after the flood, the rainbow. Do you believe in that?
Read it.
All right, Mr. Bryan, I will read it for you.
Your Honor, I think I can shorten this testimony. The only purpose Mr. Darrow has is to slur at the Bible, but I will answer his question. I will answer it all at once, and I have no objection in the world. I want the world to know that this man, who does not believe in God, is trying to use a court in Tennessee.
I object to that.
To slur at it. And while it will require time, I am willing to take it.
I object to your statement. I am exempting you on your fool ideas that no intelligent Christian on earth believes.
Court is adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So at that point, the judge stopped the questioning and he ordered Bryan's testimony stricken from the record, the official record of the trial. At that point, Darrow requested that the jury return a verdict of guilty for Scopes. And the reason he did this was, well, one reason was he saw that there was no way that they were going to win the case. And by requesting, by the defense requesting a verdict of guilty, that denied Bryan in the prosecution to give a summation speech. And Bryan had been working on his summation speech for 6 days. So Darrow effectively shut him down. And that was the end of the trial. The aftermath, how did it end up? Well, Scopes was found guilty. He was fined $100, which is equivalent to about $1,500 today. He didn't pay the fine. The fine was paid for by the ACLU. Actually, I think it was paid for by one of the newspapers. The case, the verdict was appealed, and it went to the appellate court. And on appeal, the court threw the verdict out on a technicality. The court found that the jury should have decided the fine, not the judge. And they basically didn't want anything to do with this case anymore. So they threw out the verdict, and that ended the trial. By this point, Scopes was no longer even living in Tennessee. So the case never reached the Supreme Court. The Butler Act remained on the books in Tennessee until 1966. William Jennings Bryan died 4 days after the trial. He dropped dead from a heart attack. And this was a bit of a blow to the anti-evolution movement because he was its leader and its very vocal leader. Scopes, what happened with Scopes? Well, Scopes goes off to Chicago and goes to graduate school and becomes a geologist. Go Scopes. The publicity from the trial was largely negative, and that may be why only 2 other states enacted similar acts to restrict the teaching of evolution, and those were Arkansas and Mississippi. Nevertheless, the controversy generated by the trial over evolution made textbook publishers very wary, including evolution and biology textbooks. So evolution pretty much disappears from biology textbooks until the 1960s. What finally changes things is the Soviet launch of Sputnik, the first satellite to achieve Earth orbit. And Sputnik generated a perception in America that we were technologically behind the Russians, and this led to a big push for more and better science education in American public schools. In 1958, the National Defense Education Act was passed, which provided over $1 billion for improving national science curricula. And evolution was reintroduced into public education, into the public school biology curriculum, because scientists were enlisted to write, to assist in writing the curriculum. And beginning in the late 1960s, a bunch of court challenges were made to anti-evolution laws. And by and large, without exception, judges viewed anti-evolution laws in the light of the Establishment Clause, which says, of course, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Basically, what this means is that any law that favors one religion or another is unconstitutional. And in 1968, the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, in a case Epperson versus Arkansas, ruled that the Arkansas law prohibiting the teaching of evolution was a violation of the Establishment Clause, and it was declared unconstitutional. And then in 1971, in a case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, the Supreme Court came up with a test to determine if any law was a violation of the Establishment Clause. And basically, this is referred to as the Lemon test. And the 3 prongs of the Lemon test are, does a law or policy have a primarily religious purpose? If it does, it's a violation of the Establishment Clause. Does it have a primarily religious effect, or does it result in excessive entanglement between government and religion? And the Lemon test then is used repeatedly by the courts to determine that anti-evolution laws are unconstitutional. And from 1972 to 2005, there's a whole series of challenges, basically where creationist organizations attempt to insert the fundamentalist viewpoint into the teaching of evolution, and these are repeatedly struck down. So you have some different approaches. One approach that was tried was to say that, well, evolution isn't really science; it's a secular form of religion. That people who believe in evolution, their belief is on no firmer foundation than people who believe in Christianity. And the court struck this down and said that no, evolution is in fact science. It's not a secular religion, and therefore religious viewpoints about the origin of humans, the origin of life, aren't entitled to equal time. Creation science, a supposedly scientific view of human origins and the origins of species, based on the creation story, that idea was ruled to be inherently religious, and the courts decided that you really couldn't teach creation science in public schools as science because it was favoring a particular religious view. The courts ruled that a teacher or student's right to freedom of religion was not violated by asking them to teach or to learn about evolution. In the late 90s and early 21st century, some school boards tried putting stickers in biology textbooks that basically said, you're going to read about evolution. Don't, if you read between the lines, the stickers said, take it with a grain of salt. You don't have to believe in evolution. And the courts ruled that these stickers had an inherently religious purpose and were a violation of the Establishment Clause. And then the most recent court case, about 15 years ago now, was the case in Dover, Pennsylvania, where an idea called intelligent design was introduced into the biology classrooms of the school district. And the case went to federal court, and the judge, who was actually a Bush appointee, a conservative judge, ruled that intelligent design was basically religion disguised as science and had no place in the public schools. Anti-evolutionism and anti-Darwinist ideas have not fared well in the courts. They've repeatedly been struck down when people have tried to introduce these ideas into public school science curricula. But anti-evolutionism and creationism are very much alive and well in the United States. They're very potent ideas, very potent cultural and political force. You can go to Kentucky and visit the Creation Museum, and where the story of creation as told in the Bible is presented in the same way that the Museum of Natural History presents the evolution of life. They even have a real Allosaurus skeleton that was donated. It's one of the most complete Allosauruses that's ever been found, and it's beautifully displayed in the Creation Museum. Not far from the Creation Museum is a new theme park called the Ark Adventure, where you can tour a scale replica of Noah's Ark and see the biblical story of creation as presented in Genesis, recreated in a very lifelike and compelling way to be convincing as actual history. These alternative stories to the theory of evolution and the fossil record of life on Earth are being communicated in very compelling ways, and I think we're going to continue to see challenges and attempts to get these ideas taught in science classes, in public school science classes, because a lot of people believe in them. And part of this belief is that there were dinosaurs in the Garden of Eden, and dinosaurs were taken on board the Ark, which raises some very interesting questions, particularly like the cartoon on the left, where Adam has gone missing. So that is our Darwin Day presentation. I hope you found it interesting. We're happy to answer questions. If anybody has a question, just unmute and ask. Or if you're feeling shy, you can type it into the chat room.
Do you think
there are? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, do you think events like this kind of like galvanize the anti-science rhetoric? So that you were talking a little bit about how even when the Scopes trial was going on, that there were plenty of critics. But do you see like it as publicized as it was? Grew a platform that then allows those anti-science ideas to,
Yeah, I know what you mean, Tom. So the question Tom is asking is basically, did the publicity from the trial also galvanize the anti-evolutionist movement? And I think it very much did. But what kind of took the steam out of that was Bryan's death. which was very unexpected. But there is a fundamentalist Christian university in Dayton, Tennessee, Bryan College. So, he was not forgotten, and his crusade and his ideas certainly live on, and are being carried forth by the people who are now running and teaching at running Bryan College and teaching there, for sure. I mean, it's interesting, people are very committed to the creation story in Genesis, and if you take a literal reading of Genesis, there really isn't any room for reconciliation. I mean, if you're willing to not read Genesis literally, then you can reconcile scientific ideas and about evolution with the Christian Bible, but you have to be willing to read a lot of what's in the Bible as allegory. And fundamentalism, from its inception back in the 1800s, has taken as its central tenet the idea that what is written in the Bible should be interpreted literally as it is written, and that doesn't really leave you any room. So what you have to do is bend the science to meet your literal reading of Genesis, and that's what creationists do. If you go on the website for Answers in Genesis, or if you go on the website for the Creation Science Institute, you can read what are essentially scientific papers, with an introduction and methods and interpretations and conclusions that investigate things like rock strata and the fossil record and human genetics. But the interpretation is always skewed so that the studies end up supporting the literalism, the literal telling of creation that's in Genesis, and they're very honest about it. Basically, what the creationists say is that we know what's in Genesis is true. There's no questioning that. So everything else has to be understood in light of what we know to be true. And you can't argue with that. I mean, you can't argue with people who have decided that they're taking their reality from a different source than you're getting your reality from. I mean, there's really no middle ground there. And there's a fascinating, it's like a 2-page long article written by Henry Morris's son. I can't remember. Henry Morris was the founder of the Creation Science, the Institute of Creation Science, and his son is now running it. And the article is about, how do fundamentalist Christians deal with dinosaurs? Because you can't really deny dinosaurs existed. I mean, there are too many dinosaur bones, too many dinosaur skeletons, and dinosaurs are just too culturally popular. Kids love dinosaurs regardless of their religious background. So what Morris says is that, well, dinosaurs existed. We know that's true, but we also know that Genesis is true. So we have to use Genesis to help us understand dinosaurs, which means that dinosaurs were in the Garden of Eden, but because there was no death in the Garden of Eden, the dinosaurs that lived in the Garden of Eden were not carnivores. So until the fall, T-Rex was an herbivore, and you have to reinterpret those sharp, pointy teeth, because we know that these animals could not have been carnivores. Genesis tells us they couldn't have been carnivores. So our understanding of those teeth has to change. We have to reinterpret what we think we know to match what we do know to be true. It's really interesting to read. From a scientific standpoint, it's sort of dizzying, to say the least. But that's where that particular worldview is coming from. And it's not going away. I mean, a lot of people are in the United States are very committed. Gallup polling has been, Gallup polls have been asking the question, do you accept the idea of the evolutionary origin of humans, or do you believe that humans came into existence the way that it is explained in Genesis? And the number of people who say that they believe humans came into existence as told in Genesis has hovered around 40% in the United States for at least 50 years, with not very much movement. There's been a little bit of downward movement over the last couple of decades, but otherwise it's between 30 and 40% of the American public accepts as true what's written in Genesis. So not that much has changed since the 1920s. Let me look at the chat here. Bob Barone asks, how do they reconcile that even with the theory of evolution, there had to be some starting point, and the starting point is creationism? Darwin basically said, I don't know how life got started. And he did sort of leave an opening for the origin of life as being, some event of creation. In modern biology, we do believe that life, that there is some materialistic, physicochemical explanation for the origin of life. And there's a lot of interesting research and a lot of interesting ideas on this point. We still don't know how it happened. One of the reasons why we're so interested in finding life on Mars is, if we can find Martian microbes, they may represent an independent origin of life, and comparing the way Martian microbes are organized to the way terrestrial microbes are organized might give us some very important clues as to how life gets started. On the other hand, it's entirely possible, if we do find Martian microbes, that they are identical to terrestrial microbes, which would mean that life on Earth got started because it was seeded from Mars, which is possible because big impacts early in the history of Mars could have sent chunks of Martian crust into space, and they would have landed on Earth as meteorites. And so they could have fertilized the Earth with life. It's difficult to do that in reverse. It's much harder to blast rocks off the surface of the Earth. So odds are, if there was an exchange of microorganisms between Earth and Mars, it was Mars to Earth and not Earth to Mars. So we may all be Martians, which would be a really cool thing to discover. But I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I answered a question, maybe not the question. Let's see. I'm just reading from the chat. I'd like to recommend a very interesting essay written by Stephen Jay Gould back in 1997 called Non-Overlapping Magisteria. He presented the idea that religion and science can both exist without contradiction, which was inspired by his being invited to a science symposium at the Vatican. There are many, many ways to reconcile science and religion, and I think it's up to everybody to personally decide, based on their own religious views and their own views about how we come to understand the world, how to do that. I think there are many possibilities. Everybody has to figure it out for themselves. There's certainly there's no, I mean, there are many people who are very, very devoted religious people who do excellent science. There may be a contradiction, a fundamental contradiction between science and religion. I don't necessarily want to get into that, but you can certainly do excellent science and still be a religious person. And really, I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters. having a scientific mindset and working as a scientist doesn't mean you can't be a religious person, and just because you're a religious person doesn't mean you can't be a good scientist. Another in the chat. A long time ago, I read an analysis of the logistics of the ark. If literally interpreted as described in the Bible, quite simply the amount of feeding that Noah and his family would have to do, as well as the amount of mucking out stables, would exceed the capacity of any team of humans. Moreover, as the ark contained pairs of all species of animals, it meant that Noah and his family were infested with tapeworms, roundworms, pubic lice, and more, presumably affecting their fitness. Oh yeah, I mean, the it's difficult to take the ark story seriously from a scientific standpoint. I mean, it's just too easy to poke holes in it. What I'm fascinated about with the ark story is its earlier history in other cultures like Mesopotamian culture, and the discovery of essentially much older versions of the ark story that's in the Judeo-Christian Bible that make it clear that story was borrowed from earlier traditions, and including a cuneiform tablet that's now in the British Museum that has the instructions for building the ark, but the ark that's described isn't oblong, it's round. And actually, if I actually did some spreadsheet calculations, and a round ark is a much more efficient shape. You can pack more animals per board foot of lumber into a round ark than you can pack into an oblong ark. So the Mesopotamians had it right. Minnie says that, well, wasn't the Big Bang posited by a Catholic priest? Yes, many theories in cosmology were pioneered by Vatican astronomers and cosmologists. I mean, if you want an act of creation, the Big Bang is it. Everything that exists exploded out of nothing. That's let there be light, if ever there was. All right, I think I don't want to keep people too long. We've been at this for an hour and 45 minutes. If anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to keep talking, but don't hesitate to sign off. And thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And
I have excuse me, I don't know if you can hear me. I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, I enjoyed the presentation. I think I was doing some reading, and I've been doing this for some time. Part of the reason the fundamentalists' worldview comes about as follows. Again, I'm simplifying this a little, but it goes something like this: Jesus died for our sins. And what was our sins? Well, it was original sin. Where did original sin come from? That was Adam and Eve. If there's no literal Adam and Eve, then there's no literal original sin, and therefore the meaning of Jesus is diminished or has to be reinterpreted. And that's the challenge for the fundamentalists. Again, I don't want to get into a discussion, but this is one of their big sticking points, which leads them to this anti-evolution view. There had to be a literal Adam and Eve in order for the whole thing to make sense to them. The challenge for the liberal Christians, I've been reading some websites, they go through a lot of rigmarole to justify evolution with their Christianity, and they have to run through a lot of hoops in order to do that.
Well,
that is a guiding principle for most of the anti-evolutionists. They don't say it directly, but that's, if you read carefully, that's what they're saying.
And that idea goes back, all the way to the early 1800s, even the late 1700s. Transmutationism, right? Evolution, which becomes evolution. Those ideas were seen as you said, undermining the the veracity of the story in Genesis, which is, as you said, the foundation for the sort of moral worldview that Christianity has set up. And so, you know, when Darwin published On the Origin of Species, the people who were very critical of it, including one of his best friends, the geologist, also Reverend Adam Sedgwick, said that look, you can't remove God from creation, because if you do, you undermine morality. You know, that you reduce humans to animals, and we have no moral foundation anymore, and so you're threatening to bring down the whole fabric of civilization, and that is the fear that people have of evolution to this day. You know, if you read the Discovery Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank advocacy group in Seattle that is pushing intelligent design, if you read their documents that they circulate among their members, they're trying to save civilization essentially by restoring religion to its rightful place as the foundation of morality. You know, so they really believe that if we accept the idea that humans were produced by a natural process, that is going to lead to basically lead to anarchy eventually. And so you know what you said, Mark, you know, you referred to the undermining of the story of salvation, basically, and you can, you know, that's basically the part and parcel of what I just said, which is, you know, the undermining of the whole moral basis of humanity. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I mean, I get it. I understand why people who are committed to these particular religious views are so passionate about this. I mean, it's not a trivial thing to them. And I'm not really sure how to answer it. I'm not really sure what I can tell them to make them feel better.
Can I make an observation? May I make an observation?
Please do.
I think one should be a little bit careful about, number one, looking to science to challenge religious views and beliefs and values. I think that's a dangerous activity for science to engage in, number one. Number two is, I think there's a tendency to treat, among some of us, science as a religion of itself, in and of itself. And I think we have to be careful about that as well. The mission of science is to seek understanding. And the way we seek understanding is by conceptualizing ideas about things that seem to explain what we observe. There's nothing that says that our models for things are the ultimate truth. And in fact, if you look into modern cosmology, for example, and you see what's gone on there in the last 20 or 30 years, you find out that all of a sudden there's things going on there that nobody even has an explanation for. So I think there needs to be a delicate balance. I think number one is we should allow people to have the religious beliefs they have. Number two is we should stay cognizant of the fact that we don't want those religious beliefs to take over in the school system or among our children. And number three is I think we have to always view even science with a jaundiced eye. There's been many predictions in my lifetime about ultimate disasters that were going to take place that never occurred, that were widely touted by the scientific community. And there will be many more. And science is not always right. Sometimes it comes out on the right side of things, but a lot of times it doesn't. So it just concerns me a little bit that,
well, I
should
agree.
have our beliefs, but we should understand that these are even for scientific people, they have their own view of the world and their own perspective on this. So
I agree, Ed, and I don't think that most scientists are trying to undermine religion. I think most scientists are just trying to figure out how things work.
No, I
I mean,
wasn't
what we
suggesting
do
that.
is
I
what we
wasn't
want to do.
suggesting that. I was just saying, I think Stephen Gould was right. I think the best thing to do is not pit science against religion in any context.
I don't.
These exist in, for me, disjoint spaces. And people
But-
should be free to believe what they want to believe. If they want to believe in things that others of us don't believe in, we just have, I think we ought to accept that. We can make the information available, but if they choose not to change their beliefs, then I think we should say, okay, we've done what we can do.
And most scientists are not trying to change anybody's beliefs. If anything, it's coming from the other side. I think that people with strong beliefs are threatened by what science puts forth as true. And certainly scientists are not always right. We're no better sometimes at predicting the future than anybody else, because the future is tricky. But I would argue that the scientific method is our most reliable way to figure out what is true about at least about the natural world.
Well, yep. What do you mean by true?
Very powerful.
What do you mean by true? If I develop a model for the climate and it accurately predicts what's going on, is that the truth? I don't think so. I think that's a model. And
you're out of my
reason
pay
I
grade.
believe that, the reason I believe that is that if my model turns out to be flawed, I either have to fix my model or I have to get rid of it. And that's what science is all about. You can have ideas about what's going on and claim that these are facts. But when data appears that is contrary to the facts, things have to change. So it's not about.
And by and large, they do. I mean, we are, I mean, science is inherently self-correcting. Things that are, that turn out to be false are usually brought to light. The quickest way to fame for a grad student is to prove your advisor's ideas were wrong. So, one of the things that I'm comforted by about the scientific method is that it does tend to be inherently self-writing over time.
Don't misunderstand. I'm a physicist at birth, so I understand about science. I'm just saying, I don't think science should become a religion, and I think for some scientists it is a religion. That's my point.
But yeah, maybe for some. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody. But that's it. Excellent points. Thank you. Go ahead, Sharon.
I was raised Jewish, and now I identify as a humanist right now. But I don't remember when it started. Was it the 80s or the 90s? America is a Christian nation, and I was like, it just never sat well with me, and it always bothered me why more people weren't upset by it. Now, I don't think Christians should not exist. Of course they should. I think everybody should be allowed to believe what they want as long as they're not hurting anybody. But when they started saying things like America is a Christian nation, which religion are we going to go along with? I think we're better off kind of doing none of it. I think being secular is just fairer. And people can do their religion at home, in their churches, in their temples, wherever they like.
Well, that is the idea behind the, Establishment Clause, that, the less government has to do with religion, the better.
I think we've forgotten that.
Well,
not us, but
I think it's good to remind people that was the idea, that the founders of our system of government were not trying to found a Christian nation. They were trying to create a system of government that would remain disentangled from religion. I think that's pretty clear from the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm just a paleontologist.
So, Brett, I want to thank you. You did a wonderful job organizing this. Really.
Oh, sure.
Excellent.
And I'm supposed to announce the upcoming events in our, this is part of our Science Night Live lecture series, and I can't find. We have two other events scheduled.
There's April 14th Krista Farmer is discussing the viewing of a film, Picture of a Scientist.
Right, I just posted it in the chat.
Oh,
You
thank
can
you.
see at the
Thank
bottom
you.
of the chat.
April
Sorry about
21st for Earth Day, screening and discussion of film Kiss the Ground with Carolyn Fanning and Restoration Farm of Old Bethpage Village. April 22nd, Center for Civic Engagement is present Earth Day with 3 presentations. Conversation with climate organizers, climate change and migration, and sustainable housing on Long Island.
Yeah, so we have a number of Earth Day events going on April 22nd. And you can always check the Hofstra Cultural Center website and their Cultural Center website calendar to see what's coming up. And we will be back in the fall with more Science Night Live lectures, which I'm hoping in the fall we will be doing live on campus, but also with a Zoom component, so people who can't come to campus can participate. I think this works extremely well.
Yeah, me too.
And again, I want to thank everybody for joining in, and I want to thank Sylvia and Scott for and Sharon for helping out. Helping out with this, working on the script with me, and doing the readings. It was a lot of fun.
I had a great time. Thank you for including me.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, have a great evening, and hope to see you at another event.